This is Snell's Beach. Beautiful little spot. That's the Pacific Ocean. And it's always calm because of the islands out there and beyond the barrier islands. Perfect spot for children. Let's go for a walk. So it's spring now. Spring has sprung. Not every day. Can't make his mind up. But generally, it's lovely weather now. And Snell's Beach is a delightful little place. Fee-fi-fo fun. Who's that walking over my bridge? So recently I talked about Shakespeare's last play, his Farewell, The Tempest. And according to accounts, his first ever play was Two Gentlemen of Verona. And I'm no expert, but I think you can tell that it was his first foray, whoever Shakespeare was and whether he's real. Specifically the humour, a character called Launce, and the ending. Yeah, I need to talk about that. So, we are blessed with beautiful beaches here in the Northland. So the play, a lot to talk about. And lots of themes. Letters seems to be a theme. Constancy, friendship, and how women are treated. So here is the book, The Complete Works of William Shakespeare, and for those who have seen my videos before, well annotated. What's it about? Well, it's Two Gentlemen of Verona, and it's amazing how many plays by Shakespeare are set in Italy. Romeo and Juliet is set in Verona, and Verona is in the north of Italy, not far from, well, I'd imagine, equidistant to Venice and Milan. And Venice and Milan were the big cities at the time that had immense power. The Dukedom of Milan was very powerful in the era in which this was written. And two men, sons of noblemen, one's called Valentine, the other is Proteus, and they're knocking around in Verona, but Valentine is about to go off to the court of Milan. We don't know why, but he says to Proteus, who's deciding to hang about because of he fancies a girl called Julia, Valentine says to him, "I rather would entreat thy company to see the wonders of the world abroad than living dully sluggardized at home. Wear out thy youth with shapeless idleness." Sluggardized, what a great word. And in fact, we find out later that potentially one of the reasons Valentine is going to Milan is what forces Proteus, the other guy, eventually to follow him. Because his father, who is informed by a servant that his son Proteus is trying to get the hand of Julia, is wasting time. And this is what the father says to the audience, really, about why he's going to send his son, Proteus, in the footsteps of Valentine to Milan. It's because I have considered well his loss of time, and how he cannot be a perfect man, not being tried and tutored in the world. Experience is by industry achieved, and perfected by the swift course of time. And why is he going to Milan? Because there shall be practised tilts and tournaments. Hear sweet discourse, converse with noblemen, and be in eye of every exercise worthy his youth and nobleness of birth. So why Valentine and Proteus ending up in Milan? Because if they want to be future rulers, they've got to get to know foreign courts, the courtly graces that potentially they're not getting at home, and to be exposed to grand fates and so on and so on. That is what makes a perfect man, according to this play about that place and time. So, Proteus, interesting character. He has more character than Valentine. Valentine, because of the name, is about love and wanting a woman, who we find out later. Proteus, harder on the tongue, is a much more acidic character, wheedly little man, really. Because he's sending letters to Julia, this woman in Verona, who cannot accept the letters because she says it will compromise her and it's something she can't do as a lady. But she would love to take the letters of Proteus's professional protestation of, is that a word, of love, but she can't do it, although she wants it. So instantly we're getting an eye on the world in which women live in high places at this time. They want to be wooed, but have to be careful of their modesty. And in fact, I'm just going to slightly go ahead here. When Proteus gets to Milan, we find out that Valentine, in the meantime, has fallen for the Duke of Milan's daughter, Sylvia. What is interesting about that? This is the daughter of the Duke, who obviously wants her to marry an oik called Thurio. Valentine and Sylvia are madly in love, and they're going to elope. We know this because Valentine foolishly tells Proteus. But to protect her from such, the father of Sylvia keeps her locked up in a tower every night, so no one on the prowl can get to her. Unbelievable. So the way women are treated in this play, it's interesting. Sylvia is like a bird in a gilded cage, though Julia, the one who can't accept the letters, eventually dresses as a man to go in pursuit of Proteus and herself ends up in Milan. So the two gentlemen of Verona really should have been called Two Gentlemen in Milan. So they're in Milan for the majority of the play. And while they're there, what happens is, if you've ever seen the film by Steve Martin, Roxanne, it was very popular in the 80s. In that film, Steve Martin is a Cyrano de Bergerac type character. The door's closed. Steve Martin is a Cyrano de Bergerac character, big nose, big conch, who fancies the character who the film's named after, Roxanne. But she initially falls for a handsome fireman who is not endowed with intellect. So to get close to Roxanne, the Steve Martin character helps the fireman woo her through letters and helping him become a bit more fluent in language. That's very similar to what happens in this play. We find out that Valentine wants to elope with Sylvia, has got the means to do so, and Proteus, the oik that is, the weedly little man, betrays him. But because the Duke, the father of the woman, wants her to marry Thurio, Proteus has to woo her through him as a device. And it's very similar to that movie. Well, I should say the movie is very similar to the play. And that's aptly done, very well done, in fact. And as a character, I think the one that really pushes this forward is Proteus. And it's his actions, that he's willing to betray a friend. And then secondly, Julia, who dresses up and follows Proteus and then has to remain hidden, but she's overhearing all the conversations and realises what Proteus has done, has betrayed her, and is even told Sylvia that my love back home is dead, and that kind of stuff. So it's very well done. The other thing as well, and this is quite common, and it's also, I think, brings up that time and place. So the character, Proteus, meets the one he loved in Verona, Julia, who is dressed up as a man, and he doesn't recognise her. The fact that she would be broad in the beam, it doesn't matter. Didn't recognise her. And also that in that time and place, men played women's roles, which is fascinating because they would have been dressed as women and then as men in this case. But he doesn't recognise her, and that's, you either accept that or not. The only defence I could give, and it's a very strong one, I think, it's often thought at the age of sail in the Navy, women didn't go to sea, but they did, and they even dressed as men. There's a famous woman who was a boatswain's mate, petty officer of a ship, called Tom Brown, I think she was called. And she dressed as a man pretty much all her life at sea. No one bothered. Whether she was ever found out, we don't know, but does it matter? She was never molested and she was never put upon, and she got men to do what they had to do because she was a boatswain's mate. So it's quite common. The other thing as well, and I don't know if this is actually worth bringing up, apart from the historical aspect, and I applaud Shakespeare for this. Thurio, when I was reading about Thurio, because it was Italy at the time of the Renaissance, I assumed it was a white gentleman, but he's not. He's black. And that's great, because the Duke of Milan is prepared to have Sylvia, his daughter, marry such a man. There was no stigma that, when I was growing up, that was almost unheard of in the place I grew up, in Leicester and England. It sickened me. I think it's why I loved ska music and reggae, because there was a mixing of white and black musicians. And, of course, we've come across that with The Tempest, because in The Tempest, one of the, I think it's the King of Naples, gives his daughter to a Muslim. So if that is the world affairs at the time, it's much more complex and integrated than most people would like to think. And that's good. I really appreciated that it's a multicultural, complex society in which is being depicted. Love is blind, therefore emotions and whatever should be blind as well. Just a couple of things then to go through in terms of what is said, because the title of this story is about what Julia says. Pity love is so unconstant, is it? I can't remember myself now. Yes, pity love be so contrary. Typical Shakespearean events. It's normally two people talking, with one or two on the sidelines. Valentine says, to be in love, where scorn is bought with groans, coy looks with heart-sore sighs, one fading moment's mirth. So it's typical of the era about romance and love, and it's difficult, and the person you love, it's hard to get to love them because they're either, in this case, locked up in a tower every night, or won't accept your advances because of the constraints then of society. As for example, when Julia receives a letter from Proteus at the beginning, Act 1, and she has to rip up the letter from Proteus, and then she's thinking about it, and then we hear her inner conflict spoken aloud, and she says, "Oh, hateful hands, to tear such loving words, injurious wasps to feed on such sweet honey, and kill the bees that yield it with your stings. I'll kiss each several paper for amends." It's that kind of thing. There's also a thing here about fate. So I think it's Proteus. He says, "Oh, how this spring of love resembleth the uncertain glory of an April day, which now shows all the beauty of the sun, and by a cloud takes them all away." And we've got this continual cloud coming in and out. And certainly by the end of Act 4, with one act to go, what is set up is this to and fro. How is this going to be resolved? And it's very, well done, aptly done. And I really look forward to Act 5. But I need to talk about Act 5 momentarily. Let's talk about the wit. So there is some wit that isn't the comedic relief. So the comedy relief is really Speed and Launce. And Launce and Speed are individually the servants of Valentine and Proteus. And they get together and they kind of show the common man having to deal with the louts above them that are only interested in love and doing each other over. But there is wit between Valentine and so on, Speed. So I'll just read this bit out. So this is Valentine and Speed talking. Valentine says, "I mean that her beauty is exquisite, but her favour infinite." And Speed, the servant, says, "That's because the one is painted and the other out of all count." Valentine, "How painted, and how out of count?" Speed, "Marry, sir, so painted to make her fair that no man counts her a beauty." Valentine, "How esteemest thou me? I account of her beauty." Speed, "You never saw her since she was deformed." Valentine, "How long have she been deformed?" Speed, "Ever since she loved you." Valentine, "I have loved her ever since I saw her, and still I see her beautiful." This is about Sylvia. Speed, "If you love her, you cannot see her." Valentine, "Why?" And Speed, "Because love is blind." So there's a lot of wit back and forth, raillery, and that kind of thing. Crab the dog, I've not talked about. I would imagine it would just be a dog on the stage. It's really what Launce is saying about the dog. But the Crab the dog, I'd love to meet Crab the dog. I'd love to meet Crab the dog. What a great character that would be. Mainly because it said that he urinated on a woman's dress. Now that is the good humour on show as far as Launce is concerned. I can just picture him. Perhaps I should use him for the thumb, I don't know. There's a great piece where Speed is talking to Launce. I'll read it out, but not literally following each other. There is a little bit gap between what I'm about to say. Speed is Valentine's servant, and Launce is Proteus's. And Speed says he's reading a letter, and it's actually Launce's about the person he loved, that Launce himself fancied someone. So again, letter, love. Speed, reading it. Item, she hath no teeth. This is the ideal woman for Launce, who then says, I care not for that, because I love crusts. And the next one would be, she is too liberal. And Launce, of her tongue she cannot, for that's writ down that she is slow of. Of her purse she shall not, for that I'll keep shut. Now, of another thing she may, and that cannot I help. Well, proceed. So there's double entendres, there's innuendo, as you would expect. And it's playing to the audience, of course. Launce, really, I have to be careful. Humour changes over time, as does language. So, for instance, in recent past, I loved playing Assassin's Creed Unity. It was about the French Revolution. It's one of the favourite periods in history for myself. But someone's done a video recently in which the characters that you play and the scenes that they're in, they've overlaid with Gen Z talk. And it's amazing. But of course, that language changes, and so does the humour. So when I was growing up in England, I grew up in the Midlands, in which it was more northern in attitude than, say, the southern part of Britain. And there were different types of humour. The northern club comedians of the 70s were nothing like the comedians from the south. And comedy generally of the 70s, which was more family-centred and wordplay and pranks, if you've ever seen the two Ronnies talking about language especially. But then in the, I would say, mid to late 80s, it changed. What was known as the new wave of comedians came in. And then they become like rock stars. Think of Lee Mack and Frankie Boyle. So it changes. The people of the older generation probably didn't understand the comedy of the new and vice versa. So to go back hundreds of years and talk about the comedic value in the play, I think is a bit redundant. We can't judge it by modern eyes. And it's down to us to get to know it better. What did Mark Twain said? If there's somebody over there you don't like, that's the person you need to get to know. Well, if there's something in a play or a book you don't like, you've got to get to know it better. Sylvia also shows wit against Valentine's by saying, "A fine volley of words, gentlemen, and quickly shot off." There are scenes in which the comedic back and forth is very quick, incredibly quick. And I would hazard a guess that if you was listening to it at the play, when it was put on, you'd have to pay attention, really to catch the wit. And generally, that's the thing I've always had about Shakespeare. A lot of it, when you see the production, it's a bit too quick because they've got to let the audience out eventually. You can't stay there forever. So the pace is very quick. And this is like one of those ribald comedies at times. Another recurring theme that I picked up on is eyes, especially of love. The eyes, that's important. And Proteus, like I said before, he's the one that goes through potentially the greatest arc of change. We effectively see him love forlorn and then quickly abandons one love for another and his mate. Terrible. Valentine, because of his actions, is banished. Proteus wants Valentine out of the way so he can get to Sylvia. So he betrays him, and Valentine has to go on the run. And this is two things I'd like to say about the play that I found a bit jarring, personally. And that's not to say it's a criticism. It's again, something I need to get to grips with. Valentine meets up with some, outlaws in the forest. And literally, within a hair's breadth of an inch, becomes their king, their ruler. So, things happen very quickly, none more so than at the end. How does it finish? So, far too quickly, I think. They all meet up in a forest. And Valentine's there, and Proteus, and Julia. And suddenly the Duke arrives and everything. They're all there. And it's obvious that Proteus has betrayed Valentine. And then within literally 30 seconds, they're friends again. And all made up. And they all go off. And in fact, I think I wrote down here, Proteus says, "My shame and guilt confounds me. Forgive me, Valentine. If hearty sorrow be a sufficient ransom for offence, I tender it here. I do as truly suffer as ever I did commit." And then instantly, on saying sorry, Valentine says, "Then I am paid, and once again I do receive the honest." And they make up. I'll leave the rest about how he's prepared to trade a woman, but there you go. So that the two Gentlemen of Verona, it's worthy because it's actually well written, I think. I think the comedy's dated for myself. It's just the end. And does that mean it's a bad play? Well, no, because if you have one bad tooth, you don't take them all out, do you? It's a good play, but if I was leaving the theatre and I'd seen it for the first time, I thought, well, that ended quick. Where's the fisticuffs? like Oliver. What, fisticuffs? So it has its... I'm glad I read it this time. I managed to get it all the way through. And I would recommend anybody who is interested in Shakespeare or Shakespearean plays, that type, read it. And funnily enough, I will say this. I love 18th century plays. Yeah, I knew it would be here somewhere. So I've been reading this, and I did the Both Stratagem. And the language, it's almost 100 years apart. And I would say, even at the early point of Shakespeare, it's so deep with the complexity of language and wordplay that it knocks socks off the plays of the 18th, which have become a bit more standard, and the candle's a bit dimmer than when it was flaming with Shakespeare. Shakespeare, whoever it was, however many stand-ins used the name Shakespeare to hide themselves, or if it was just one man, the course of his writings, and how early on he's obviously showing a great depth of understanding of time and place and meter and tension, is unparalleled. It really is. He's definitely a corpus of work that I can only say is genius. So if that is his first and potentially his weakest, then I'm interested to go on and do the next one, which, according to this book, is The Merry Wives of Windsor, which I've never read before, I know nothing about, but I don't think it's to do with Henry VIII. I assume not, anyway. So, 2 Gentlemen of Verona. Interesting, and definitely worth some couple of hours reading. Ta-ta for now.